The bedchamber is warm, too warm. Candles burn in clusters along the walls, their light catching the gold thread woven through the tapestries. Outside, rain strikes the stone. Inside, silk rustles as attendants arrange the pillows one more time. The young queen places her hand on her abdomen. She is 16. She has been married for 7 months. The midwives have confirmed it. Before dawn, her husband will be informed. Before dawn, everything will change. On the desk in the corner sits a leather-bound ledger. Its pages track lineages, births, survival rates. It contains more names of the dead than the living. This is not a story about medicine. This is a story about what happened when a woman's body became the most valuable political asset in the kingdom. If you're interested in histories buried within the records, consider subscribing. Now, let's go back to the beginning. In royal courts across Europe, from the 15th through the 18th century, pregnancy was not announced with joy. It was recorded, documented, monitored. The moment conception was suspected, the woman at the center ceased to be a person. She became a vessel. The machinery of state, of dynasty, of international alliance pivoted on what grew inside her. We know this because the correspondence survived. In Vienna's archives, a Habsburg ambassador writes in 1548, his tone clinical. The princess shows signs. Physicians have been consulted. We await confirmation. No name. No concern for her well-being, just a transaction update. Pregnancy in a royal household meant surveillance. The queen's ladies-in-waiting were selected not for friendship, but for loyalty to the king's advisors. They reported her moods, her appetite, any sign of distress. Physicians were summoned not to care for her, but to verify the pregnancy, and more importantly, to predict the sex of the child. Methods ranged from examining urine color to observing which breast seemed fuller. None were reliable. All were recorded in medical journals as if they were science. The woman herself had no privacy. Her bedchamber became a stage. Courtiers needed to witness consummation to confirm legitimacy. Later, they would witness the birth for the same reason. Every intimate moment of her body was a matter of state record. Consider the case of Anne of Brittany, Duchess and twice Queen of France. Between 1492 and 1498, she was pregnant 7 times. 4 children were born dead. 2 lived for days. 1 son survived to age 3 before measles took him. Contemporary chronicles catalog each loss with bureaucratic precision, but they never use the word grief. They use the word failure. The language is cold. The queen was again delivered of a child that did not survive, as if she were a mechanism that kept breaking down. After Charles VIII died, Anne married his successor, Louis XII. Her body became the subject of diplomatic obsession. 3 more pregnancies. 2 daughters lived. The son they desperately needed never came. Councils across Europe debated what this meant for trade routes, for military alliances, for territorial claims. Anne's womb was discussed in treaties, her fertility analyzed in encrypted letters. Her body was not her own. It belonged to France, to Brittany, to the future of 2 realms that could not merge without a male heir. At 36, her body gave out. Official records cite a kidney stone, but historians examining the pattern see something else. 10 pregnancies in 14 years, 7 losses, the physical toll of repeated trauma. When Anne died, no one mourned the woman. They mourned Breton independence, which her failure to produce a son had doomed. Within a generation, Brittany would be absorbed into France. The extinction of a duchy attributed to one woman's reproductive inadequacy. Anne's story was not exceptional. The threat she faced was not random. It was structural, embedded in the very design of royal marriage. Royal women were married young, often within months of their first menstruation, to maximize childbearing years. Medical texts from the period recommend marriage at 14 or 15, arguing that younger bodies were more pliable for childbirth. What they meant was that girls could be conditioned to accept their role before developing the capacity to resist it. The wedding night was witnessed. In some courts, the marriage bed was blessed. The couple watched as they entered the chamber, the sheets examined in the morning for blood. This was not ceremony. This was verification. Proof that the girl was a virgin, proof that consummation occurred, proof that any future pregnancy was legitimate. Spanish court records from the 16th century include reports from designated observers, usually older noblewomen, who testified in writing about what they saw. The language is formal, legal, precise. The marriage was completed in the customary manner. The girl's experience is nowhere in the text. Once pregnant, the danger multiplied. Medieval and early modern obstetrics were not designed to save the mother. They were designed to save the heir. This is not interpretation. It is explicit in the medical literature. A midwife's manual from 1513 instructs that if labor becomes obstructed, the midwife should preserve the child at all costs, for the mother may be replaced, but the child is the future of the line. Caesarean sections existed, but only as a last resort to extract a living child from a dying or dead mother. There was no anesthesia. There was limited understanding of infection. The survival rate for the mother in such procedures was near zero. The choice, when it came, was never the woman's. In 1537, Jane Seymour, third wife of Henry VIII, went into labor. The birth was difficult. The baby, the future Edward VI, was positioned poorly. Contemporary accounts suggest the physicians consulted with Henry. They offered a choice: save the queen or ensure the child's survival. Henry chose the child. Jane delivered a living son. She developed puerperal fever within days. She died 12 days after the birth. State papers celebrate Edward's arrival with elaborate language. They dismiss Jane's death in a single line. The Queen, having performed her duty, departed this life. Her duty, not her death, her duty. The psychological architecture of this system was suffocating. Royal women understood the terms: bear a son, secure your position; bear daughters, risk replacement; fail to conceive, face annulment; die in childbirth, be remembered as a vessel that served its purpose. There was no escape. Catherine of Aragon endured at least 6 pregnancies during her marriage to Henry VIII. 5 ended in stillbirth or infant death. 1 daughter, Mary, survived. The diplomatic correspondence from Spain during this period shows Catherine's own family pressuring her to produce a male heir, as if her failure was a personal betrayal of the alliance between England and Spain. When Henry sought to annul the marriage, Catherine's inability to produce a surviving son became the justification. Theologians were summoned to argue that God was punishing the union. The argument was accepted. Catherine was removed. Anne Boleyn took her place. Anne Boleyn had 3 pregnancies, 1 daughter, Elizabeth, 2 miscarriages. The second miscarriage occurred after Anne discovered Henry with another woman. The shock, some historians suggest, may have triggered the loss, but that detail is not in the official record. What is recorded is the date, the fact of the miscarriage, and Henry's growing displeasure. Within months, Anne was arrested on fabricated charges. The indictment included accusations of adultery, incest, and treason. She was beheaded. Her daughter was declared illegitimate. The pattern is so consistent it ceases to feel like tragedy and begins to feel like procedure. Wait, this was the procedure. Royal pregnancy was not a medical event. It was an administrative process. Women were assessed, impregnated, monitored, delivered. And if they failed to produce the required outcome, a living, legitimate male heir, they were replaced. The machinery was efficient. The records are meticulous. Births, deaths, marriages, annulments, all logged in ledgers with the same clinical detachment as grain harvests or tax revenues. The violence was not in chaos. The violence was in the system itself. Consider the architecture. Most royal births occurred in designated lying-in chambers. These rooms were sealed, windows covered, doors guarded. The stated reason was to protect the mother and child from drafts and disease. The actual effect was isolation. Once labor began, the queen was cut off from everyone except her attendants and the midwives. If something went wrong, no one outside the room knew. If the child was stillborn, if the mother hemorrhaged, if there were complications, the information was controlled. Courtiers waited in outer chambers, receiving only the updates the attendants chose to give. This control extended beyond the birth. If a queen died in childbirth, the announcement was delayed until arrangements were made. Treaties needed to be secured, succession clarified, the political situation stabilized. The death was timed for maximum control. Marie-Louise of Orleans, Queen of Spain, died in 1689 at the age of 26. She had suffered multiple miscarriages. Her final illness is attributed to complications from a miscarriage, though the exact cause remains debated. What is not debated is that her death was not announced for several hours, during which time Spanish ministers secured agreements with France about the line of succession. Her body was a political object, even in death. The letters that survive from royal women themselves are rare and carefully worded. They knew their correspondence was read. But occasionally, in the margins, in coded language, in letters to trusted family members, glimpses of their reality appear. A letter from Isabella of Valois, child bride to Richard II of England, contains a line often overlooked by historians. She was 11 when married, 13 when she wrote to her mother. "I am afraid," she wrote, "that I do not yet please the king." 6 years later, she went into labor. The child was stillborn. Isabella hemorrhaged. She was 19. The phrase, "I am afraid," carries a weight the chronicle writers never recorded. The medical treatments made survival less likely, not more. Bloodletting was prescribed throughout pregnancy. The theory claimed it balanced the humors. The reality was that women entered labor already weakened, their bodies drained. Physicians prescribed restrictive diets, eliminating foods that might have provided iron, protein, nutrients the body desperately needed. The justification was that certain foods would make the child too large or the mother too heavy. The result was malnourishment disguised as medical care. The lying-in period itself became a death sentence for many. Women were confined to bed for weeks before delivery, forbidden from moving. Blood pooled in their legs. Clots formed. The rooms were sealed, windows covered with heavy cloth, fires kept burning even in summer. The stated reason was protection from drafts. The effect was suffocating heat, stale air, fever. Infections spread easily in those closed chambers. If a woman questioned the protocols, she was accused of endangering her child. If she asked for a different physician or a trusted midwife, she was labeled hysterical, difficult, unfit. The control was absolute. Resistance was pathologized. And then there was the silence. After a woman died, her memory was managed. If she had produced an heir, she was honored. If she had failed, she was erased. Queens who died without sons were buried with minimal ceremony, their tombs unmarked or simple compared to those who succeeded. Stillbirths and miscarriages were often destroyed or left incomplete in the registers. Royal birth logs show gaps, entries crossed out, entire pages torn away. What survives suggests that many pregnancies ended in loss, but exact numbers remain unknown. Failures were not worth preserving. In the Chapel of the Kings at Westminster Abbey, the tomb of Elizabeth of York bears an inscription celebrating her as mother to Henry VIII. It does not mention her other children. It does not mention that she died at 37, days after delivering her 8th child, a daughter who did not survive. The inscription focuses only on her successful production of a male heir. Her suffering is not recorded. Her achievement is. The erasure extended to living women. After Catherine of Aragon was annulled and removed from court, her title was stripped. She was no longer queen. Official documents referred to her as the king's former wife or the Dowager Princess of Wales. Her daughter Mary was declared a bastard. The legal language was specific. Catherine had never been queen. The marriage had never been valid. 24 years were retroactively erased. Catherine spent her final years in isolation, forbidden from seeing her daughter, her income reduced, her household dismissed. In 1536, her body surrendered. The official cause was likely cancer, though some historians point to the cumulative toll of her pregnancies and the stress of her exile. Henry did not attend her funeral. The archival record is careful to note this, not as cruelty, as protocol. She was not queen, therefore the king's presence was not required. But the evidence remains. Beneath the official histories, traces survive. Letters smuggled out of confinement. Marginal notes in account books listing payments to midwives for services rendered, with no further detail. Inventories of lying in chambers that include blood-stained linens, instruments we would now recognize as medieval surgical tools, crude and brutal. Archaeological excavations of royal chapels have uncovered infant remains, buried without markers, too many to count. DNA analysis in some cases has confirmed they were royal births, children whose existence was never officially acknowledged. In the Royal Archives at Windsor, a ledger from 1502 contains a crossed-out entry. The ink is faded, but modern imaging technology has revealed the text beneath. The queen was delivered of a son who did not draw breath, baptized in extremis, interred without ceremony. The name of the queen is not recorded. She was Elizabeth of York. The son was her 8th pregnancy. She would not survive the 9th. This was not ancient history. The last European queen to die in childbirth was Astrid of Belgium in 1935. The circumstances were different. She died in a car accident while pregnant, but the succession crisis that followed, the immediate political maneuvering, the focus on securing the throne for her young son, all echoed the same structures that governed royal births centuries earlier. The machinery adapted, but the logic remained. Royal women today still face scrutiny during pregnancy. The sex of the child is still news. The health of the heir is still discussed in terms of stability and succession. The language has softened, but the underlying framework persists. A duchess is not a person carrying a child. She is carrying the future of a dynasty. The documentation continues. Photographs, medical bulletins, carefully managed announcements. The privacy is still conditional. The performance is still required. In the British Library, a register of Tudor births sits in a climate-controlled vault. The pages are brittle. The ink has faded to brown, but the names are still visible. The dates, the outcomes: delivered, survived, delivered, deceased, delivered, deceased. Each entry is a woman reduced to a result. The last page is blank. Not because the entries stop, but because someone decided the losses were no longer worth recording. We remember the kings. We study their wars, their politics, their territorial gains. We remember the sons who inherited thrones, but we forget the women whose bodies built those dynasties. We forget the daughters who were never counted. We forget the stillborn heirs whose absence redirected the course of entire nations. History is written in the language of kings, but it is built on the bodies of women who were never given a choice. So here is the question that remains. When we celebrate royal lineages, when we admire the continuity of dynasties, when we study the great houses of Europe, what are we actually celebrating? The survival of a bloodline? Or a system that required women to die again and again for that survival to be possible? The ledgers are still there. The names of the dead still outnumber the living, and the silence continues.